we are live. Hello, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. This is another webinar for Argo CD, but this time we're going to talk about Argo CD anti-patterns, things that you should not do with Argo CD. Some housekeeping. This is being recorded, so don't worry. We will send you the recording afterwards. And I have some slides here for you, and I will share the slides with you after the webinar. So don't worry about that as well. And because this is a live event, if you're watching us right now, feel free to ask your questions in the chat of your streaming or video platform, and we will show the questions on screen and we will answer them. If this is a recording, bad luck. Feel free to find me afterwards with the email I will present on screen. And that's for the housekeeping. Now let's see the slides. Revital. Yes. So this is actually part one. You can see on the bottom left. So if you enjoy this, there is a part 2 and part 3 that are coming. So stay tuned. So who am I? My name is Kostis. I'm working for the Octopus Deploy as a developer advocate. Previously, I was working at Codefresh, the GitOps company, but Codefresh was acquired by Octopus Deploy. I'm actually a member of the Argo team, focusing mainly on Argo CD and Argo rollouts. If you know Argo, there are also 2 more projects, Argo Workflows and Argo Events. And I'm the co-author of the GitOps certification that we are going to mention at the end. So this is not another, boring webinar where I will say about best practices and how we do something with Argo and how we applied Argo to a big company and did X. No, today we will do the exact opposite. We will tell you what you shouldn't do with Argo CD, which I think is much more interesting. So the idea behind this webinar started like most other ideas. I'm closely following the Slack channel of the CNCF for the Argo CD channels. If you're working with Argo CD, you should be a member of these Slack channels in the CNCF. And I monitor the questions that people ask there. I see what the questions people are asking about Argo CD. And every time I see a question that is getting asked like 3 times, 4 times, I know, okay, this is time to write an article. If you have searched something about Argo CD for application sets or Helm, probably you have landed on one of my articles. So this happened again. Essentially, I try to catalog all the bad practices or questionable practices that I saw in the Slack channel. And I wrote this really big article. You can see usually most articles in the blog is like 7 minutes to read or 8 minutes to read. This one is 40. It's a really big one. We're not going to talk about the whole article today. We're going to do some of the top ones. But I want to make it clear that in preparation of this article and this webinar, it's not like I sat down and thought myself, oh, what are some bad practices for Argo CD? No, I didn't have to do that. All these bad practices are things I have seen with my eyes, like after talking, with prospects or customers or at KubeCon. So if I talk about something and you think, oh, this is really strange, nobody could do that, actually somebody did that. So I'm giving you the opportunity to avoid all these common pitfalls with Argo CD. And essentially, this is the kind of information that I would love to have myself. Like if you go back, to 3 years ago or 4 years ago when I was starting with Argo CD, this is the kind of article that I would love to read that gave me all the guidelines on what, to avoid and what to adopt. So the article contains 30 bad practices. Today, we're going to talk about the first 10 if we have the time. And then if you remember, I said in the beginning that this is part 1. There is also part 2 and part 3. So in the other 2 parts, we will cover the rest of the anti-patterns. Okay, so today just the first 10. And essentially, I've written the anti-patterns in order of adoption. Like the first ones are the first decisions that you have to make once you decide to adopt Argo CD, and then as we go high up in numbers, it's more advanced decisions and more advanced decisions. So even if you're just getting started with Argo CD today, this webinar, the first one, is perfect for you. But even if you're an expert, I think you'll find something useful. Okay, so enough discussions, enough introduction. Let's dive straight in. Number 1, not understanding the declarative files of Argo CD. There is actually a big discussion here, which we have done in previous webinars about GitOps and what GitOps exactly means, because several people think that, oh, I have something in Git, I'm using GitOps, or Terraform is GitOps, or stuff like this. That's another discussion. But from this point, when we talk about GitOps, we mean apply GitOps everywhere. Like you cannot, have some GitOps or 50% GitOps, you have GitOps. So when you adopt Argo CD, you have brand new files. So you adopt Argo CD in order to deploy an application that has customized files or Kubernetes manifests or Helm charts. And as soon as you adopt Argo CD configuration itself becomes another Kubernetes resource. So here I have the basic resource of Kubernetes of Argo CD, which is the application, and this is another brand new Kubernetes resource that you get. And you need to ask yourself, what do I do with this application? And the obvious answer is you also need to store it in Git like everything else. And this is just an example. One of the most important pages that you should probably bookmark if you are using Argo CD, it's this one. Just search for Argo CD declarative setup. And this is a very good documentation page that explains all the Argo CD resources and how they map to physical files, to physical YAML files, which themselves are other Kubernetes resources. And now, after you adopt Argo CD, you actually have two kinds of resources. You have the existing files from your application, and you have the files that Argo CD introduces, and they are settings. And you must store them in Git as well. Okay, this is the important point here. These files should be treated like any other file. It's not something special. You should store them in Git. We will talk later whether you should store them in the same place or in a different place within normal manifest, but you should store them in Git. And I'm mentioning this because Argo CD actually offers the capability to work bypassing GitOps. Okay, even though Argo CD is a GitOps tool, you can use Argo CD and bypass GitOps. And the best example is this nice new application button that you can see on the Argo CD UI. So first you click New App, and then you get a nice form, and you can fill in your details and say, where are my manifests? And then click the Create button, and that's it. And boom, and you have a nice Argo CD application. This is great for an experiment or for trying Argo CD, but not for production purposes, because the application that you just created is not saved anywhere. You just create an Argo CD application, which is not in Git. It's not anywhere. And if this Argo CD instance or cluster goes down, you lost that application. Okay, so I have seen companies that they have used this in production, and then they start asking questions: where is this application stored? How can I back it up? Or how can I back Argo CD? Or how can I have active configurations of Argo CD? All these questions mean that the people never understood what exactly GitOps means. So store everything in Git, not only your own applications, but also the Kubernetes manifests that define Argo CD applications. And be particularly careful with this feature. It's great if you're just playing with Argo CD, but not for production. The same goes for editing this application. So that was number one. Treat all files as Kubernetes manifests and store them in Git, even including Argo CD resources themselves. A related anti-pattern is dynamic applications. So this is also from people that haven't really understood what GitOps means. I see this in large companies. There is already an existing infrastructure, many applications. Maybe they are migrating from VMs or from other systems to Argo CD. And essentially what they do is they think that Argo CD is like the typical API-based platform that you call the API and you do something. And then if you want to do something else, you call the API again and you do something. So what they do is they already have a configuration database or a different system or somewhere else where there is a configuration for the applications. And then once they adopt Argo CD, they think and they say, oh, wow, Argo CD has an API. So I will just create a fancy tool and read my configuration and call the API of Argo CD and create my applications. And again, here we are missing the point that the applications you create are not saved anywhere at all if you do like this. And the classic example that you will see is these companies have some kind of special CLI or custom CLI that runs and it retrieves information from other systems. And then at the end, it spits out a file that Argo CD can take and create an application. So you run this command, and yes, you have an application in Argo CD, but it's not really saved anywhere. Another pattern I have seen is where companies have some partial support for files, like there is a template for an application in Git, but it's not exactly the final thing. So they run some processing. Here I have as an example this env subs utility, but it can be anything else. Then they template the file, and then the result is sent straight to Argo CD. So again, as a result, you have an application in Argo CD, but the application is not saved anywhere. So if this Argo CD instance goes down, you lost the application completely, or if you lose the cluster. So while I understand why people are doing this, they have the mindset of, I have an application, it has an API, I call the API and I do something. Argo CD doesn't work like this. You shouldn't use the Argo CD API as the main method of creating applications. Using the API, to check something is fine, but not for creating applications. So what you should do instead, you should use Argo CD the way it was meant to be used. So you use Argo CD and you point it to a Git repo, and that Git repo should have your Kubernetes resources plus the files that we explained in the previous anti-pattern, your applications or your application sets or your app project or whatever Argo CD needs. And that's the only thing Argo CD knows. It continuously syncs from Git to the cluster, and you can use your custom CLI, but that custom CLI should commit stuff to Git. It should not contact Argo CD directly. It should commit files to Git. So Argo CD doesn't really care how these files arrived in Git. It's your responsibility. If you want to reuse your original configuration database or your original system, that's fine. You can do it. But as far as Argo CD is concerned, the process will start from Git. So if you follow this pattern, now all your applications are in Git, and you can easily, recreate them. So if, let's say, this cluster goes down, I can spin up another cluster, point it to the exact same files I had in Git with the previous cluster, and Argo CD will take over and it will create my applications in exactly the same way as I had them before. So there is nothing to back up and nothing to worry about. Now, this is for creating applications, okay? That's how you create applications initially. But you also need to maintain this as soon as you change applications. So GitOps is not only for creating the initial application, but you must follow GitOps all the way. Remember, I said in the beginning that either you follow GitOps or you don't follow GitOps. It's not like you can do it 50%. So even if you create an application, if you want to change it, the obvious thing to do if you follow Argo CD principles, GitOps principles, is to go and commit again. So if you want to change the Docker image of a deployment, you go to the Git repository that has this deployment, you make a commit, and Argo CD takes over. That's how things should work. Unfortunately, I see some people that use this kubectl set image command, or they do patches, and that's how the official, let's say, way of deploying, of updating an application works. So maybe the original way of the application was fetching it from a Git repository, but then a new version comes out and they have a pipeline in Jenkins or in TeamCity or in Circle CI or in GitHub Actions, and it runs kubectl commands. You shouldn't do this because, again, your change is not saved anywhere. It's only saved in the cluster. It's not matching what you have in Git. And actually, this goes against another anti-pattern that we will see later regarding self-sync behavior and, auto-sync and self-heal of Argo CD. So these were the first two anti-patterns, which I think they are a group on their own, of not understanding GitOps and treating Argo CD as an API platform where you call the API, you do something, then you want to change something, you call the API again. No, don't do that. Everything should be handled by Git. GitOps means that if you want to deploy an application, if you want to update an application, if you want to remove an application, you do stuff in Git. It doesn't have to be, by a human. Maybe it's another system, but Git is the source of truth. Okay, so now let's go to number 3, parameter overrides. Now, I will tell you here a personal opinion. If it was up to me, I would actually remove this Argo CD feature, okay? I would go to the Argo CD source code and just remove this feature completely and create a brand new version for Argo CD that doesn't include this feature. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Argo CD is developed by a team, so I cannot do this. But at least there is a nice warning there. So even if you visit this documentation page and you want to understand how this feature works, there is a nice big warning at the top and says, hey, if you do this, know that you're not following GitOps. So parameters in Argo CD essentially are a way where you override stuff. So here is again the application CRD that we have for Argo CD. You can see it's a Helm application. And at the end, we have the recommendation of using value files. And we'll talk about Helm later, where I'm saying this application is launched and it needs values.yaml and environments test values.yaml. And then somebody has said, oh no, we will also override some stuff. And even if values say something about these two properties, we will override them in the application. So now you don't have a single source of truth anymore. You have two sources of truth. Some of the information is in the values of the Helm chart, and some of the information is now in this file. And Argo CD essentially merges these two sources of information and creates a result. Now, in this example, it's super easy to understand what is going on. I can see this and know that, hey, my values contain some things, but my parameters override something. But if you're working with big applications, many clusters, lots of overrides, this is a recipe for disaster, and we'll also see a related anti-pattern later. So don't do this. Don't override stuff in your Argo CD applications. And also, there is this capability where, again, you can change the properties of an existing application by just calling set and then passing a parameter. And as you know from the previous anti-pattern, this is not saved anywhere. So you do a custom change in your Argo CD application and you don't have it in Git anymore. So again, this goes against GitOps. So don't use the parameters feature. This is the warning. And if you are thinking about this, this is actually a real example. I didn't create this example. It was an example from a user. I'm not pointing fingers to anybody. That's fine. Everybody's learning. But I'm saying that people do this, and it's not my idea of how it should happen. So that was number 3. And now, speaking of Helm, and we talked about this, not understanding Helm. Okay, people understand Helm, but essentially not understanding Helm and how it works with Argo CD. I see a lot of people that they try to learn Argo CD and Helm at the same time. Like they don't know, how these systems works. They adopt both of them and they try to work with both of them at the same time. And usually they come and ask questions about Argo CD, which in reality they are questions about Helm. Or they ask, how do I do this thing with Argo CD? And that thing is already covered by Helm. So my advice here is, if you're just getting started with Argo CD and you're using Helm, we'll see the next pattern about customize, understand how Helm works. Understand how Helm works on its own without Argo CD. I see a lot of people that don't understand Helm value hierarchies. Like, many people think that you have a chart and then you have a single Helm value file, and then you merge this chart with the values and you have the end result. Yes, that's the simplest scenario, but Helm is more advanced. You can have a Helm value hierarchy, so multiple files that you can create in a tree format. And you can see in this example, I have these common values, which contains, let's say, everything that applies to all environments. And then only for production, I override some values or add some more with my old prod env YAML file. And then at the end, for that specific cluster, I have something else. So this is hierarchy. And then with just the Helm executable, okay, this is just the Helm executable, I can install the application and define many value files, and these take priorities. Like, the order of those files is important, and you can guess from the names that the last file overrides what is before that. What I'm explaining right now is standard Helm capability. A lot of people come to Argo CD and they ask how they can do this, how they can have common values for all environments, and how they can override them for different environments. And they are start asking these questions about application sets and applications. And this is a standard Helm capability that you can do with just Helm and nothing else. Okay, so this is very, very important. So once you have understood how Helm values work, you should go and create all configuration for all your environments with just Helm. We're not talking about Argo CD just yet. Okay, this example that I'm showing, and it's from the blog post that I will link later, explains how your environments work with only Helm values, nothing else. There is nothing Argo CD specific yet. So you have defined your environments, and then you can test them with just the Helm CLI. You run, Helm, you pass the appropriate parameters, and you say, yes, my production cluster in Europe has what I expect. So this is the hard work, okay, that you must do with just Helm. And after you finish this, once you adopt Argo CD, things are very natural. You just create an Argo CD application, you're passing value files, and you're passing the value files in exactly the same order as you were using with a Helm executable. So here I'm using the previous example, but this time with Argo CD, and I'm saying to Argo CD, look, first you will fetch common values at YAML, but then I also have some overrides in all production environments just for production, and then some overrides in specific prod cluster. So Argo CD will mimic the exact same thing that you had in Helm. And you can see how simple my Argo CD file is. Okay, there's nothing else here. I have already made my application work with Helm on its own, and my application, and my Argo CD file is super simple. I've seen many people that they jump to super complex application Argo CD files, and they try to put hard-coded values and ask how is the precedence there and how they can order stuff. You don't need this. Just create everything with Helm, and then Argo CD will work just fine. And we'll also talk why this is useful for developers later, because we always think about, or we don't think about developers, but we should think about developers. As a disclaimer, before I started with Argo CD, I was a developer myself, so I know the pain that developers feel where something is not correct. This will also help developers. Like if you mix Argo CD information and Helm information, you make the life of developers very difficult, and it's difficult for them to understand what is going on. Maybe if you're an Argo CD expert, you can understand what is going on, but developers, as we will see later, don't care about Argo CD. So if they want to test something and you are asking them to install Argo CD, you are doing it wrong. And if you want to know more about this, I have a full article, another guide on how to create Helm hierarchies with Argo CD, where I'm having all the details, and also there is an associated Git repository that you can use as a starting point that has many environments, and it shows how the Helm hierarchy works on its own before adopting Argo CD, and then how Argo CD takes over and just reuses the files that you already have there. So that's about Helm. Now, if you're using Customize and you didn't get about Helm, now it's your time. I can say the exact same things about Customize. And actually, for Customize, it's even more interesting, because several times I see people that think they know how Customize works, and they just know the basics. They just know the overlays and nothing else. But Customize is a very powerful tool. It has many components and many configurations and many directives that you should learn about. And usually when somebody asks me about how can I do something with Argo CD and Customize, I almost always bet that their question can be covered only by Customize. Like Customize supports their problem on its own, and Argo CD just uses what is already in Customize. So learn Customize. If you're using Customize, understand what it offers. And as a starting point, that's the question I always ask to somebody who comes to me and says, I know how Customize works. Here is the question: what is the difference between overlays versus components? And if somebody knows, you should put it in the chat. It's not like an easy question. I have just an example here. I asked an LLM to show the answer. I haven't even checked if what it says, it's 100% correct. But the important thing is that this is a complex decision. You need to understand what is the difference and understand how to combine them. In my article, the example actually shows how you use components versus overlays. So understand how these work with Customize. And if you want to say that you know Customize, go and read the documentation. This is a screenshot of the Customize documentation, and you can see on the left sidebar how many Customize directives and properties exist. And people almost always know the basic, like only the overlay, maybe the patch, and that's it. Go and read everything and understand what Customize offers before Argo CD gets into the picture. And like the previous advice, create your customized applications so that they can work on their own, and then bring Argo CD in and just reuse what you already have. And again, for developers, it's the same as Helm. You should make their life easy so that they have a customized configuration that they can use on its own without Argo CD, and they can understand what is going on with their application. If you mix things and you have some configuration customized overlays and some configuration Argo CD, this could be confusing for everybody, and also super difficult to test locally, as we will see. So This is the example. If you want to see how customize works and how you can use components versus overlays, there is another article. Remember, I said I follow all the discussions in Slack. There is another article that shows how you can use customize overlays and components and create a structure that can be used by Argo CD very easily without any configurations. So these last two anti-patterns, not understanding how Customize works with Argo CD and not understanding how Helm works with Argo CD, essentially bring another anti-pattern, which I think is the most important one. If you need to keep one thing from this presentation today, keep this anti-pattern in your mind. At least for me, this is the most important, which is how developers interact with Argo CD. So today I'm going to say to you something which I consider obvious myself, but I think a lot of people essentially, if they are platform engineers or cloud engineers or DevOps or sysadmins or whatever the company calls them, don't really, I wouldn't say understand, you understand this, but don't really focus on. So here I have an X array from a developer. This is a developer and a developer mind and how they are thinking. I'm showing you visually how developers think. So if you look in their mind, almost everything has to do with their programming, like programming in their favorite language. If they are, Go developers or Rust developers or TypeScript developers, that's what they love to do. This is where they spend most of their capacity. Then they have some domain knowledge, which is according to the company they're working right now. So if you're working in finance, developers need to know about some finance stuff. If you're working in medicine, they need to know about some medical stuff, which is the things that they incorporate in the application. Sometimes they find this part boring, but it's essential for the job. So these two things, general programming knowledge and specific domain knowledge, take, 80% of what the developers think. Kubernetes is just a technicality for developers. It's just their deployment target. They don't think too much about it. They don't want to think too much about it. Maybe this year it was Kubernetes. Last year it was Mesos Marathon. The previous year it was a VM. If you ask them, maybe they don't care. Helm and Customize is another tool that maybe they have to learn, and it's a specialization. Usually they know only Helm or Customize. And this is also, getting even less attention. And the last small box at the bottom left where I could not put the letters there are Argo CD. So I'm saying this because for you as an operator, maybe Argo CD is something important and you spend 50% of your time working with Argo CD. For developers, Argo CD is not important. It's a technical detail. So let me get this in writing. Developers do not care about Argo CD manifest. In fact, they maybe do not care about Argo CD at all. They don't care about what Argo CD does behind the scenes, how Argo CD creates applications. All they care is programming and sending something to production. That's the only thing they care about. So forcing them to learn Argo CD, for you, it might be an obvious decision because Argo CD and Argo CD is important for you, but for them, it's not important. And I can guarantee that almost always they might say, oh, why do I need to learn Argo CD? I just found about Helm and Customize, and I just found about Kubernetes. You make my life more difficult. And the second important part is that if you look at how a developer works, so this image is, let's say, the typical day or the typical half a day of a developer, is essentially most of their time is spent creating a feature, okay? So they spend most of their time creating the feature locally. That's how a developer starts. They start locally. Argo CD doesn't know anything. They create the feature, they test, they try again, they fix something. Yes, they will use an LLM to fix stuff. Then at some point, they might be confident and they will do some testing. Maybe they will do some local testing or some integration testing. And then there is a clear milestone where they will say, okay, I feel confident enough. I'm going to commit and push this feature. So there is a big line there, or a big, let's say, before and after event, which is how a developer works before a commit and how a developer works after a commit. So after a commit, usually developers they want to deploy their application in the first environment. In this example, it is QA, and then they want to promote their change to the next environment. And that's what they want to do after the commit process. And it's obvious here that Argo CD is responsible for the last part. Like, yes, Argo CD should make the initial deployment, and you can use Argo CD to promote. So even though for you, Argo CD is important and you see deployments as important, For developers, deployments and promotions are the last step in a big process, okay? And yes, it's important, to send something to production, but most of their time is spent in local development. So if you do things correctly, they would have to work with Argo CD only at the last three stages. They should not have to work with Argo CD in the first stages. They shouldn't need to work with Argo CD while developing. So if you are following any of the previous anti-patterns I explained, like on not understanding Helm or using parameters or using customized data in application sets, essentially you force developers to learn Argo CD in order either to launch an application locally or to understand how an application is deployed. So maybe a developer wants to understand what are the QA settings for an application so they can do something locally. So if your existing setup requires developers to use Argo CD locally, I can tell you right now that you're making their life miserable. That's the exact word. Remember, I was a developer before this. So don't do that. For every change that you do in Argo CD, ask yourself, okay, I finished my own thing that I was doing. What about developers? Can they test this thing easily on their own? Can they do it? And this is a similar picture where somebody wants to run an application but reuse the QA settings, and the first thing somebody says, "Oh, you should install Argo CD." Okay, and this is a lost battle right away because you're making the life difficult of a developer. They don't want to learn Argo CD. They don't want to learn which version of Argo CD you're using. They don't want to check out your application sets or your applications and create local everything. This is too much work for them and they do not care. So this slows them down. You might think that you have the perfect Argo CD setup, but you see it works great for deployments. But in reality, you are slowing your developers down because they cannot test things locally easily. If, on the other hand, you follow my advice and you have a Helm setup that works on its own or a customized setup that works on its own, developers don't really need to know anything about Argo CD, at least for local deployments. They can just take the existing Helm chart, the existing Helm values, the existing customized overlays and components, and run locally whatever they want to run without Argo CD. And this is how you make life easy for developers. So I consider this very important. From all the anti-patterns that we have explained and the anti-patterns that we will see later, I think this is the most important one. I've seen many companies where people think that they have a great Argo CD setup and it works great for developments and promotions. But if you ask developers and what they think about Argo CD and if it helps them with local development, when they're creating a feature, their life is very difficult and they feel miserable. So don't do this. Next, anti-pattern, grouping applications at the wrong abstraction level. Here, it's not like, we'll say this is wrong and this is right. There isn't a clear question or answer. But the point here is that if you adopt Argo CD, suddenly you have lots of choices of how you group applications. So if you were using, let's say, Helm, you say, I'm going to group these microservices or applications in a Helm chart, in an umbrella Helm chart, and I will deploy it with Argo CD. Or you say, no, I'm going to use a single Argo CD app that I will point to many manifests, or you will have different applications on their own, or create an application set, and so on and so on. Now, here my point is that you should understand the choices, you should understand their advantages and disadvantages, and sit down and make a decision that suits you best and your organization. So if I come to you and I ask you, hey, why are you using umbrella Helm charts? Your answer should be, I evaluated all other choices, and because X, Y, Z, I think umbrella Helm chart is the best choice. That's great. But if your answer is, oh, I knew Helm and I never checked application sets and I just grouped everything to umbrella Helm charts, then this is wrong. Okay, essentially, it means that you didn't do your research. And with application sets, I hear this all the time. People come to me and they ask something where the answer is use application sets. And I say, okay, have you seen application sets? And they say, no, I haven't. I thought it was optional. It's not optional. Check everything. So understand what are the choices and understand which is best for you and make a decision that is well informed, like a decision where you know why you made this decision and it wasn't random. And you need to sit down with your team and your developers, yes, your developers, and ask these questions. Like ask the applications that I have, how do I deploy them? Do I always deploy them at the same time? Do I deploy some of them, like a subset of them? Do I upgrade them all the time? Is the same team behind these applications or not? Do I have different configurations? And you can see right now that all these questions doesn't mention Argo CD anywhere. And this is important because I see people starting backwards, like they read about application sets and they say how I'm going to adapt what I have in application sets. That's not how you should start your evaluation. Start the opposite way. Understand what are your applications, what are your teams, who are working on these applications, how often they get deployed, when they get deployed, and then evaluate the other choices and say, yes, application sets are a perfect fit for this setup. So do this. I know it's hard. I know that some teams just adopt Argo CD, they install it and start playing with it. You need to sit down with everybody, especially the developers, which I know is difficult because you think you're talking a different language, but sit with your developers, explain that you are going to adopt Argo CD and ask them this question so that you have more context. A related anti-pattern is abusing the multi-source feature. So the multi-source feature was probably the most requested feature of Argo CD for a really, really long time. Like people wanted this feature, and finally the Argo team implemented. And this feature was implemented for a very specific scenario. If you control your own manifest and you have everything in Git and your Helm charts in Git, Argo works great. But sometimes, especially for infrastructure applications, you want to use a Helm chart that you don't control. So it's not in your Git repo, it's somewhere else. In the example I'm showing in the picture, it's Prometheus. But then you don't want to get the default configuration of this external Helm chart. You want to put your own configuration. So you want to use the external Helm chart with your own Git values. That's the scenario that this feature of Argo CD is trying to solve. And the solution was to allow you to use multiple sources. So you can see here, this is a standard application CRD, but instead of spec source, I have spec sources. And here I put these two sources where the first one is the external chart, the second one is my values, and then Argo CD will merge the result and deploy the final result in the cluster. The problem here is that this sources array is not really checked by Argo CD on the number of items. So here I would have 2, but you can put 3, 5, 10, 20, however you want. So some people abuse this feature and they see this sources directive and they say, oh, I know what I will do. I will put everything here. So I will create a single Argo CD application and it will have 20 sources there. And then things are super simple. I just deploy one application and I have a fine way to bootstrap my cluster with everything I need. Yes, this sounds great in theory, but this is not how you should do it. After you finish the setup, you will find so many issues and so many problems, and you will point the finger at Argo CD, thinking that Argo CD is not doing its job, but in reality, you did not understand what exactly is the point of multi-sources. So understand why we introduced this feature. I'm saying we, the Argo CD team, why you need to use multi-sources. Consider it like a last resort feature. Ideally, if you're interested in a chart, you should check it out, put it in your own Git repo, and then use it from there. But we understand that there are several cases that you need to use multi-sources. But please, please, please don't use the multi-sources feature as a generic way of grouping applications. This is not how it's supposed to be used. And I'm actually the person that put a warning in the documentation that advises against this. Okay, how we are with time? We have 2 more. So, not splitting the Git repositories. Some people say that I should put this as number 1. This is a very big discussion that we have done many times, which is the location of your files. And essentially, once you adopt Argo CD, you suddenly have 3 kinds of files. You have your original source code that you had before. You have your customizer Helm charts. So these are the customized files that describe your application, or your Helm charts that describe your application. And then finally, if you remember anti-pattern number 1, you have the Argo CD resources that you also need to store. So you have your applications, your app project, your application sets, your configurations. So you have 3 kinds of files. And then the question that everybody asks is, where should I store these files? And sometimes people, do the obvious thing. They have a single Git repo with everything. Like they have a single Git repo that has source code and customized and Helm files and application sets. And this doesn't really work in big installations. Argo CD has a best practices documentation page. If you search Argo CD best practices, you will find it. And the first thing it says there is split your Git repositories, and your source code should not be in the same place as customized and Helm files. So read this documentation page on the why. I'm not going to explain it here again, but for me, it's important to understand the life cycle of your files. So coming back to the previous discussion that you need to talk with the developers, you should understand that all these files have a completely different life cycle. So source code changes all the time, like developers change it all the time for many things, even for things that might not get deployed at all. They might change an integration test or a library in a mocking setup, something like this. Then you have customized and Helm values that are mostly static, like you created them once and then you regularly change them. Usually you just update the container image, or maybe you have an environment variable that somebody introduces, so you need to change them not as many times as the source code. And then finally you have application sets and applications for Argo CD, where if you follow my advice, they should be created only once. Like you shouldn't change application sets and applications all the time. You should create them once and then let them be there and forget about them. So instantly you can see that all these three categories have a different life cycle. So mixing them in the same Git repo creates problems because you are confusing people about the life cycles and what things should change and how often they should change. So don't do this. Also read the best practice documentation. And then a second decision in how many Git repositories you have. Like, okay, you decide that yes, you want to do the correct thing and create a Git repository that has only Kubernetes resources and not the source code. There is another big decision there that you can take regarding the number of Git repositories. And again, many companies just do the easy thing and create a monorepo. They have a single repository and everything that is Argo CD related is there. And this initially works, but then after you have many applications and many clusters and many application sets, you have performance issues. One of the most popular questions in the Argo CD Slack channel is, I have a big number of applications and a big number of clusters, and Argo CD is slow to sync, to fetch, to go to Git, and so on and so on. So my suggestion here is, again, have a discussion with developers and create multiple Git repos per team, okay? Also coming back to the discussion about how to keep developers happy, if I'm a developer, ideally I would like to have a Git repo of the things that are relevant to my team, not the things I don't control and I don't have access with. And you, as part of the infra team or DevOps team or whatever else is called, you should also have your own Git repository that has infrastructure stuff. And I'm saying this because, as a developer, I see sometimes setup where I want to change something with the application, and I do the change in a Git repository that also has information about core DNS, Nginx, Cert Manager, and other things that as a developer, I don't care. I don't want to see them. I don't want to know what happened to them. They are not interesting to me. So think about your teams. And last but not least, disabling autosync and self-heal, which I think a lot of people do. So let's go one step back, okay? Forget about Kubernetes for a moment. Forget about Argo CD. We are talking about plain deployments. Imagine we are still talking about virtual machines. There is this very famous problem, and if you have worked with Terraform or Chef or Puppet or any other tools, you know what I'm going to say, where you have configuration drift. You have a group of servers where you think you know what these servers have, like you think you know the operating system, the libraries, the applications, but then somebody makes either an ad hoc change or a change that was never recorded or a change that happened by mistake or something else, where one of those servers is now different. It's not the same as the other two. So this is a silent time bomb, because then you go and deploy to this group of servers, and deployment succeeds in some of them and deployment fails in some of them. And obviously, the number one question that you ask yourself is, what is different with this server where the deployment failed? And you start looking for tools that compare folders and compare files and let you know that, yes, this server is a bit different than the others. So this was a very difficult problem, and Terraform actually was a big step in fixing this, because with Terraform you have immutable infrastructure, and instead of mutating servers, you create servers from scratch, and this is great. But essentially, we introduced the same problem with Kubernetes. So now we go to Kubernetes, we have Kubernetes cluster, and if you allow not only developers, but anybody to do changes in the clusters, somebody might go out of process and change a small setting or a small config map or something else. kubectl has a edit command, which I personally consider really dangerous, like that you edit something live on the cluster, but it's there. I cannot say anything about it. So maybe you have in your team a cowboy developer that goes into QA. So maybe you have locked down access on production, so developers cannot access production. That's great, but you allow developers to access QA. So they go into QA, they change something, and then next time you deploy something in QA, it fails because somebody made a change. And this is a huge problem, and it's getting even worse the more clusters that you have and the more applications. So the good news is that this problem is eliminated completely with Argo CD. One of the best selling points of Argo CD is that it is bidirectional. Not only it looks at Git and says, hey, something new is in Git, what do I do? Should I sync it or not? But it also goes the other way. It looks at the cluster, the live objects in the cluster. So if somebody changes something in the cluster, you can set up Argo CD and it will notify you and tell you, hey, something is changed. What do you want to do? And if you have this self-heal option not enabled, you can actually go into the Argo CD UI and look exactly what is changed. And for me, this is magic, that not only it reports what is different, but also tells you what is different. So this is amazing, but it only works if you allow Argo CD to work like it's supposed to be. If you go and either disable self-heal or disable autosync, this capability goes away. So you will have all the problems of configuration drift that you had before, and you are losing the biggest advantage of Argo CD. Like, in my opinion, the number one advantage of Argo CD right now compared to traditional solutions is that you eliminate configuration drift once and for all, but only if you allow Argo CD to do it. So go and enable autosync and self-heal in all your applications. I actually find some companies and they come to me and say, yeah, we love autosync and self-heal, but we only have it enabled for QA and not for production, which for me sounds really strange because self-heal is exactly the feature that you should have in production. Like, the number one problem that might happen in production might be configuration drift. So this is where I want to solve configuration drift. If deployment fails on QA or staging, yes, things are bad, but not that bad as if they fail in production. So you should enable self-heal and autosync everywhere. Feel free to disable them only while you are testing Argo CD. So if you don't know, how Argo CD works, yes, disable them, make some changes, see how Argo CD reacts, fix your files, fix everything. But once you're feeling confident with your setup, you should have self-heal and autosync everywhere. And I think that's the last one. Let's see. Yes. So these are the 10 anti-patterns. If you want to know more, I have more details in the blog post itself. The blog post actually contains all 30 of them. So if you want, to see the spoilers for the next webinar, you can keep reading. We covered the first 10 here. Feel free also to drop comments in the blog if you have questions. If you want to play with Argo CD and even see some of these anti-patterns in practice, the certification I mentioned before is the Codefresh GitOps certification, where we launch for you an Argo CD instance in your browser. You don't need to install anything on your laptop. You just sign up, start in your browser, and you have a real K3s cluster with a real Argo CD instance in your browser. And you can play around, and each lab works for, I think, 1 hour. So you can, create it, destroy it, play with it, and then nothing bad will happen. There are even some labs that have multi-cluster setups. So if you want to see how Argo CD works with many clusters and also how you create application sets that work with many clusters, this is a great way to do it. I think one of the exercises is launching 4 clusters. So imagine you have 4 real clusters with a centralized Argo CD instance in your browser with minimal effort. So this certification has a cost because we need to cover the money for the labs, like the resources you create. But if you're watching this webinar right now, or if you watch the recording, you can use the code anti-pattern and you get 50% off. Yes, amazing. This works for each individual level. It has 3 levels: beginner, medium, advanced, or you can take the bundle and you have everything. So that's a great resource. If you're just getting started with Argo CD and you want some advice, or you want to check if your setup is correct, or you want to understand if what you're doing is the best practice or not, we also offer support. And actually, it's me and my team. And my team is comprised from Argo CD developers, like developers that work with the Argo CD team and are part of the Argo team. If you're familiar with the last version of Argo CD 3.0, that release was made by us. And Reggie, that made the release, is part of my team. So you will speak with people that actually know Argo CD and actually develop Argo CD. So it's a great way, even if you need help while adopting Argo CD, or even if you are confident about your setup, but you need some more advice on what things to improve. And that's it. I think we have covered everything. Let's see if I go back in the beginning. This is my email if you want to ask specific questions. In all the articles I've mentioned, you can also add the comment, and also the articles come with a Git repository. So this is another thing that I like to do. Instead of just explaining how things work, you can go to the article, get on the Git repository, fork it, and use it as a starting point for your own company. So that was part 1. See you in part 2.